Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. On this date in 1971, there was a massive tornado outbreak along the Mississippi River. Dozens of tornadoes were reported and more than 100 people died. Entire towns were wiped out. Louisiana had their only F5 tornado on record. This was the U.S. temperature map for February 21, 1971. There was a massive area of cold, dry air which collided with the warm, humid air in the south. This is the classic setup for tornado outbreaks. I remember that winter very well because I was living in New Mexico and we had record cold. The Santa Fe airport got down to minus 21 degrees and Albuquerque got down to minus 13 degrees. This was the maximum temperature map for January 6, 1971. Almost the entire United States was in a deep freeze. No place in New Mexico made it above freezing that day, which is pretty remarkable. A few months later, NASA's top climatologist, S.I. Rasool, predicted a new ice age in about 50 years. If he were correct, we should expect a new ice age next year. The United States and the Soviet Union were mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate was becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice have recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. 42 top American and European investigators met at Brown University under the auspices of the National Science Foundation. They then wrote this letter to President Nixon. The main conclusion of the meeting was that a global deterioration of climate by an order of magnitude larger than any hitherto experienced by civilized mankind is a very real possibility and indeed may be due very soon. The cooling has a natural cause and falls within the rank of processes which produced the last ice age. The present rate of cooling seems fast enough to bring glacial temperatures in about a century, if continuing at the present pace. Time magazine predicted another ice age. In Africa, drought continues for the 6th consecutive year, adding terribly to the toll of famine victims. During 1972, record rains in parts of the U.S., Pakistan, and Japan caused some of the worst flooding in centuries. Telltale signs are everywhere, from the unexpected persistence and thickness of pack ice in the waters around Iceland to the southward migration of a warmth-loving creature like the armadillo from the Midwest. Since the 1940s, the mean global temperature has dropped by 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists have found other indications of global cooling. For one thing, there's been a noticeable expansion of the great belt of dry, high-altitude polar winds, the so-called circumpolar vortex. Cold air is pulled down across the western U.S. and warm air is swept up to the northeast. The collision of air masses of widely differing temperatures and humidity can create violent storms, the Midwest's recent rash of disastrous tornadoes, for example. They explain very clearly that the polar vortex is an indication of cold and that extreme weather is caused by cold air. All of the same things which climate scientists now nonsensically attempt to blame on global warming. In 1970, the deadliest cyclone on record killed more than 500,000 people in Bangladesh. Australia had their largest bushfires in 1974. More than 5 times as many acres burned in 1974 as during the current summer. Northern Territory in Australia had massive fires in 1968, 1969, 1969-1970, and in the 1974-1975 season. On Christmas Day 1974, Darwin was destroyed by Cyclone Tracy. In January of 1974, Queensland had one of their worst floods on record. In April of 1974, the United States had its worst tornado outbreak on record. In June of 1974, Phoenix had their all-time record heat wave, with 18 consecutive days over 110 degrees. They've never come close to that again. And the always alarmist Guardian was predicting a new ice age coming fast. As I've explained in previous videos, extreme weather is associated with cold air. If the Arctic kept warming, that would mean less cold air and less extreme weather. The extreme weather and global cooling scare of the 1970s is very inconvenient for global warming alarmists. Rather than dealing with reality and doing actual science, the climate science community has simply tried to erase the past. They say that the global cooling scare consisted of 9 paragraphs written for Newsweek in 1975. History doesn't lie, but climate scientists do. This was the March 1, 1975 cover of Science News. Meanwhile, back in the real world, 1 year ago today, Arizona had their all-time record snowfall. And the golfing in Scottsdale, Arizona that day was great. The extreme weather of the 1970s was associated with expanding Arctic ice and lots of cold Arctic air. It's unfortunate that climate alarmists attempt to erase the past rather than understand it. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.